Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Discover Your Intuitive Self. And I'm your host, Brenda Reading. Well, I have a very special guest for tonight's show, and her name is Lynn K. Hunter. She is a certified forensic psychic investigator, a psychic medium, and an instructor at the Edgar Cayce Center of New York City. Welcome, Lynn.
Hi, Brenda. Good to see you.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here with us tonight. I have a lot of people that can't wait to hear some of the good things you have to tell us. So we're going to just dive right in, Lynn.
Okay.
When did you realize you had your intuitive gifts? And what did that look like for you?
Well, thinking back, I always knew things about people and situations. But my mother was a twin, and she was very psychic. So, it all seemed pretty normal to me. But as I think back, I was drawn to metaphysical things at a very early age, experimenting with dowsing rods, asking for a deck of Gypsy Witch fortune-telling cards. When I was young, I convinced the local girls' club to let me set up a tent at their penny fair to do fortune-telling readings with a fishbowl. So I've always been drawn to metaphysical things, and I actually created my first deck of tarot cards at 16. So
wow! So this has just been normal for you, since you've been very young. That's really awesome, Lynn. So you are a certified forensic psychic investigator. What type of requirements do they make you complete to be a certified?
Well, you have to work on, solved cases so that they can see if you're, accurate on your information. And you have to achieve an 85% or better accuracy rating.
Wow, 85%. That's like fantastic. I wish all the readings had to attain an 85% accuracy reading, right? Right? Wow.
One thing about, psychic work is that you're never 100% accurate,
Right.
Never claim to be 100% accurate.
Right. Kind of like when people say, oh, well, I want to talk to my mother or I want to talk to my dad. And I always tell them, well, first of all, it's not dial a ghost. I can't guarantee that that's who we're going to get, right? And like you say, it's like we're dealing with people we don't know, and we're dealing with things we don't know about. So we just try to be as accurate as we can.
Right.
What was it like to work with law enforcement when you were doing that?
It depends on the law enforcement, really. I think on the whole, they're very hesitant and skeptical about psychics in general. And there have been many situations where supposed psychics have called and given information and they've acted on it and it turned out to be false. So I think they're very skeptical in the beginning. So what I usually do when I start out is to give them some preliminary information about the case, just things that I've picked up in general, just to make sure that I'm on track with the case. And then that kind of sets them a little bit at ease. Also explaining how you work helps, because unless I worked with a psychic before, they're expecting something really strange, I think. And so if you go in and just explain how you work, I think it puts them at ease, it puts you at ease, and, it's a little easier to work together.
I remember a few years ago when you taught a psychic investigator class for Lilydale Assembly, and I remember some of the exercises that you had us do, and it was obvious to me that when you're doing that psychic investigation work, you're using all the clairs that you can possibly use. What you feel, what you see, what you smell, what you sense, what you know, all of it. And you gave us a lot of good exercises to utilize those clairs in the class. one thing I remember was one of the first exercises is we had to try to determine if the person we were looking at in a picture was past or alive.
Right.
And I remember that at first that was kind of difficult for me just from looking at the picture, you know. And so why don't you just talk about that for a little bit?
Okay. So when you're working like that, usually I'm going to say right away that when you get a case, you generally get a photograph to work with. And it may not be a beautiful, perfectly digitized photograph. It could be something that's been photocopied many times and it is unclear. So basically what we do when we're looking at the photograph is we're looking for the presence of the soul in the body. So they say the eyes are the windows to the soul. And so if people focus on the eyes in the photograph, you can generally go into the soul of the person and get information in that way.
Yeah, and then we also did some remote viewing. That was a topic that I really knew nothing about. So it was a new experience for me. So I'm going to ask you about that too, Lynn.
Yeah, so remote viewing is a term that these days is used in a very general way. However, true remote viewing is something that was, started at Stanford Research Institute and actually eventually used by the U.S. military for spying purposes. So it's actually a very strict written protocol, and people don't really think about it that way. But what remote viewing really does, it trains you how to train your left hemisphere, which is your logical side, to slow down and let the right hemisphere, which is your intuitive side, to really work. And so during the remote viewing process, you're kind of keeping the left hemisphere quiet. They call it, quieting down the president in a way. And you're letting that intuitive side come out.
Yeah, I remember that you gave us like an envelope that had coordinates in it. And that was it. It was like, you get no other information. It was like coordinates, and you weren't allowed to think. It was link, don't think, Mm-hmm. And it was a very interesting class. And I know that we had homework at night, and it was like we were really into the case, and we did all sorts of things that week. It was an intense week, but I really learned a lot. So being that we both believe that we are all born with psychic abilities, tell me more about your connection to the Edgar Cayce Center of New York City.
So in 2017, I was approached by the Cayce Center of New York to put together a year-long certification program. What is their first certification program in psychic skills? And so it's a 12-month program, and there are 10 intensive weekends. We call them immersion weekends. And we start out with the basics of energy and vibration, and then each consecutive month we build on that. So then we go into the core psychic abilities like the clairs, telepathy, telekinesis, and the basics of ESP. And then we just keep progressing from there. So each month we're building on and eventually working our way up to spirit communication and spirit influence, like inspirational writing and speaking. And then at the end, we do a little psychic investigation so that people can get an idea of how to use your psychic skills in a practical way.
It sounds really exciting and intense, too. So this course, I believe the next course starts in
March. It actually starts March 20th. And so enrollment is open right now, and it will run through February of next year, 2022. And then at the end of it, students who wish to be tested to be certified by the Casey Center can be tested.
Wow. So, and this is all online, correct?
It started out as a live program, as a very experiential live program, because we do a lot of things like divination. We use a lot of divination tools and things. But last year with the pandemic in March, we had to go online. And so we had one live class and then it went online. So it was a matter of trying to figure out how to translate all of those things that we do hands-on in class into an online experience. But these were topics that I had been teaching all along for 10 years online. So it was fairly easy to do that. And one benefit actually of doing it online was that you can split up, break out into private chat rooms. And so you could partner up with your partner and have that nice silence and a private space to do a reading in. Whereas when you're in a live class, there are, 20 people in the room and you're all talking together at the same time. So it can be a little distracting. So that's one bit of going online.
Well, I think for our listeners, this online course, like things are starting to look up, we hope, right? So one of my concerns was, okay, so like I live in Western New York and I'm not going to be able to travel to New York City, right? To do it if you decided to change it to an, in-person experience, but you're not. You made the decision to keep it online. So yeah, I think that's very important for our listeners in case they would be interested in doing this type of this class. So it's not just about forensic psychic investigation. It's about everything, your whole psychic, your intuition, everything.
Right. It's about, as you said a while back, we know that everyone has psychic abilities. It's part of our biology, part of our human makeup. And it's just a matter of allowing those things to come out and be used again. And so the course really, as I said, goes from the basics of energy and vibration, and we go through all aspects of psychic work, tea leaf reading, scrying. We do, inspirational writing, speaking. So it's not just about psychic investigation, but it is nice to have a practical way to use these things if you choose to in the mundane world.
Yeah. So with that being said, so anybody who heard this and was interested in it that had no prior experience could take this class.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that is encouraging.
The class is a mixed range from beginner to people who are advanced and do readings now. But it's a nice blend of people, and beginners learn from experienced people, and experienced people actually can learn from listening to the experience of the beginners as well. So it's a nice group when you have a mixed crowd, a mixed group of students in it.
I think when it comes to our psychic abilities and the spirit world, we're all learning every day. No matter how many readings we do and no matter how many experiences we have, spirit never ceases to amaze me, So just for informational purposes then, for them to find out more about this online class through the Edgar Casey Center of New York City, taught by yours truly, they can go to the edgarcaseynyc.org website.
And they can Casey Center, edgarcaseynyc.org, that's correct.
And also your website, right? Linda K, initial K, Hunter.net.
Correct.
Yes. So that's great. And if perhaps they had any type of questions that they wanted to reach out to you personally, you have made your email available, and that would be Lynn, Lin, at K, the initial K, Hunter.net, correct?
It's Lynn, Lin, at Linda A.
Oh, okay, good.
Linda,
That's your,
the initial K, Hunter.
Okay. Thank you for correcting that for me because that's a very important piece of information. So, one of the things that you mentioned when you were talking about the different topics is telekinesis. So, I have had this recurring dream since I was a child of being able to move things with my mind. Okay. I mean, every time I wake up, I've had it probably at least 10 times in my life. And then I come downstairs or, come out of my bedroom and I go sit in my living room and I sit there and I try to do it and it doesn't happen. So, as telekinesis, tell us about that a little bit more.
That is one of the most difficult psychic abilities, I think, to achieve. It takes a lot of focus and concentration, and I think people are anxious to be able to do it. And say, for example, I often go to the Remote Viewing Association conference, which usually takes place out west. And during the course of the conference, they have what they call a PK party, a psychokinesis party. And they'll come in with a huge box of silverware and dump it on the middle of the room. And everybody grabs forks and spoons to try spoon bending. And you have a group of 200 people shouting, bend, bend, bend. And nothing happens. And then as soon as you look away, the spoon will bend over. So it's one of those things that if you're really focusing on it, which you have to do, nothing happens. But then as soon as you can relax and let go, the thing will bend. So it's one of those tricky kinds of psychic skills.
Wow. And like in my dream, though, I literally, like, objects like move, not just bend, like they move like a foot, or 2 feet or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I wake up and I'm like, oh, that's just crazy. I can't do that, or that's not possible. But it is, right?
It is. I don't do it. I haven't reached the point where I can just look at something and make it move. But the best way to practice with that, and this is something I can do, is to take a bowl of water, take something like the leaf of a petal of a rose, put it on the water, and focus on that when it in a very still place, of course, where there's no breeze or any vibration, and just focus on that. And it's a very light thing, and that you can start with, and you will be able to make the rose petal move.
Oh boy, Lynn, look at this. I have 12 of these sitting in front of me because it was my birthday, last week, 9 days ago. So I got lots of petals. So guess what I'm going to be doing tomorrow? I'm going to be putting one in the water.
With water.
Oh, Lynn. No, seriously, I'm going to try it. So, oh, goodness. Well, I know one of the other things we did, and I talked about pendulums a few times on the show, is we used the pendulum to locate a body in an investigation. Why don't you talk about that for us tonight?
So, pendulum dowsing on a map is what Brenda's referring to. And in a case, and one psychic investigator, Pam Coronado, is actually very good with this. You take a large map of the area in question where they suspect that a remains might be located, and using a pendulum, or you can even use something like a needle and a thread, anything that will swing back and forth, and you get your hand very still and just focus on the map and ask your subconscious mind to tell you where the body of the person is located, because in a case, that's usually what they're looking for. They have a homicide case, but they don't know where to find the remains. And so map dowsing is one way to go about that.
Very interesting. I'm trying to think of some of the other things we did. I remember one of the also things that we did is there were some exercises we did with our eyes. I know it's very basic, but would you like to just talk about that for our listeners that haven't really done any type of learning for psychic intuition skills?
I'm trying to think of the exercise that you might be referring to, and I cannot at the moment.
Well, that's okay. I'm sure you can think of something else.
I can talk about something else that we did in the class, which was tests used by law enforcement.
Oh, cool.
And I don't know if you recall being given 4 different photos. And this is a way that law enforcement will test a psychic who's coming in to ask, to do work. Because the best way to approach law enforcement, let's just talk about that for a moment, is to go in, say, I'm a student or a psychic working on solving cold cases. And, if you have any cases that I can work on, it would be helpful for my development. And they would give you certain kinds of test cases to work on. And so one thing that they might do is to give you 4 different photographs. And those photographs would be of people who committed 4 different types of crimes, say robbery, sexual assault, homicide, fraud, or something like that. And by looking at the energy of those 4 different photos, you would need to identify which crime each person committed.
Wow. And how did you do with that, Lynn?
Pretty well.
Well, obviously better than 85%, right?
85% or better. You would have to do at least that.
I know one of the things when we did the homework for the class, and we had to put ourselves in the scene with the victim at the time that whatever happened to them. It was like we had to be there with them. And I have to say, for me personally, you're kind of like living that experience with them, as it happened in the past, but it feels like real time for you, right?
Right.
And it's for me, I have to say that after that week, that was hard emotionally for me. Because you're as an empath, right? And right. Sensing, you're feeling their emotions, you're feeling what's going on. I could see that in order to do that work, you really have to have very good boundaries. Talk about that.
Yeah, you do have to separate yourself from the crime. When you said talking about putting yourself in the situation, many people want to jump into the victim's body and, be there. But you have to learn to create a barrier between you and, the crime itself. And so you're really viewing it as an observer and not, a participant. So you don't really want to be in the victim's place. You just want to be observing. But it does take a while to, I call it developing a shell. And it took me a while to do that as well, because in the beginning I was very sensitive about any type of violence, and I couldn't even watch a boxing match or anything like that. And so it did take time for me to be able to kind of harden myself to that, to put up barriers and to not be affected by the emotional parts of watching a homicide. So it's something that does take time, but it's something that you definitely have to develop in order to be able to work, on a case.
Right. For me personally, I don't know that I could do that unless, like you say, you develop. And I suppose too, it's like when you're learning to do readings for other people, when I first started doing that, I would feel like, how the person passed, and I'd be having all the feelings and everything. And I told Spirit, I'm like, I don't need to feel everything, just tell me, and so I worked with my guides so that I didn't have to feel, I didn't have to feel all that. And I would imagine maybe that's the same thing. Maybe you could do that too, doing the psychic investigation as you work. Talk about that, Lynn.
Yeah, you do work with your guides as well, to help you to keep barriers, to help you to get information in a case. So it's a matter of finding balance between working with spirit, working in the physical with the physical energy of a crime, because the crime takes place here on the physical plane, and that's where the energy of the crime remains as residual energy. So we're working in that way. And then, of course, by keeping a connection with the spirit world, you may be able to also communicate with the victim, or, work with your guides on a spiritual level.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you, it's such an interesting field. And I would imagine it's like, you have to develop your intuitive gifts to be pretty fine-tuned, to be able to do that work successfully. And I just want to give our listeners again the information at the website again, because we're going to wrap this up shortly. It's edgarcaseynyc.org or lindakhunter.net. And that is to learn about this wonderful course. Linda, I want to thank you for coming on with me tonight. It's been my pleasure to have you. And to everyone else, we will see you next week. Have a good week.